April 21st, and this puts us at day 112. So if you've been with me, it is the 112th day into the year, which again puts us at April 21st. Our reading today is actually a super short reading, and it is 2 Samuel 3:6 through 4:12. And I am following the 1 Year Chronological Bible reading plan, which you find online at oneyearchronologicalbibleonline.com. This is not my reading plan. I did not put this in chronological order. I am just taking it from a different website that I thought was done really, really well. And I thought having it in this particular chronological order seemed to make the most sense when I am reading it and trying to put the story together. If today is your first day here, I encourage you to go back to Genesis 1. So find me all the way back at Genesis 1, because going through it chronologically builds a foundation to help you understand where you're coming in today. If you have been with me from the beginning, then congratulations, because we are so far in right now. There's no way we're going to quit, because we're already 4 months in, which is like a quarter of the way in, and we're doing really great. So today we are still with King David. King Saul has died. And so we are now in a split kingdom. All right. So for those of you who just need a little recap, a little refresher for a minute or two, the 12 tribes, which are the 12 sons of Israel, which are the 12 sons of Jacob. They have 12 tribes. This has lasted for hundreds of years at this point, probably close to about 800 years, including Exodus, Judges, and now where we are in this period in history. These are Jacob's 12 sons who were in Israel under oppression. They were saved out of Egypt by Moses. They were taken in towards the promised land. They kind of hovered around for 40 years. Joshua then moved them into the land of Canaan. They took over most of the land of Canaan, but not all of it. The people who still live there, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Moabites, the Philistines, they rose up time and time again and oppressed the Israelites. And every time that seemed to happen was when Israel was turning away from God and they were worshiping other gods. And then they would cry out to God. God would raise someone for them, and then they would win. Then they decided it was too rough. The Philistines were too big, too strong, too tough. And they then needed a king. They wanted to be like everybody else in their land. And so they asked for a king. God gave them King Saul. King Saul didn't work out so well. God even said, I regretted making you king, because he didn't listen and follow God. He was a man who came from a small tribe, and a small tribe, one of the tribes, which is Benjamin, a small clan inside that tribe. And when he rose to power, he just still didn't follow God. And so God then anointed King David. But it took many years for King David to actually, for King Saul to die, which would eventually, hopefully, give David the throne. Well, when Saul died, instead, this guy Abner, who was Saul's second in command, raised Saul's son up. So Ishbosheth was the next king of Israel. So he took every tribe. Remember, there were 12 of them. He took 11 out of those 12 tribes. The 12th tribe was Judah, which was where David was from, and they elected David to be king. And what happened so Ishbosheth was sort of maybe the natural king, right? What would have been the normal procession for kings, right? He was the son of the king, and so that would be a normal guy that would be raised to power, and that would become the next king. David was the king that God anointed, and then slowly people started to see his prowess in war and how God blessed him, and then everyone started flocking to David. So some of the, I want to call them rejects, some of the disenfranchised, the unloved, the unwanted, they flocked to David first, and then slowly but surely we saw all these warriors and all these other people start to flock to David. So David's army started to grow and expand. Saul's army started to contract, because then the two of them started warring against each other. And what happened is David would continue to win battles. Saul, the kingdom of Saul, which was really Ishbosheth at this point, would lose battles, and so they'd be losing people. So what happens is now Abner, who was the first in command, the one who put Ishbosheth as the new king, king of Israel, started to get a little greedy. We know this from Ishbosheth's side. And of course, us as a reader, we know this. It doesn't seem like David knows any of this information. So I say that because we're going to see some dialogue between them. And I was in some ways offended that David is accepting the proposal that Abner is making because of what I saw in advance. But the truth is David doesn't know about what Abner has been doing. So let's go to what Abner has been doing. He's been a little bit sneaky. And it seems like, although I'm not 100% sure because it doesn't verify this at all, it seems like Abner, first in command, was sleeping with, not David, was sleeping with Saul's concubine. So it says this Rizpah, daughter of Ai. So and then Ishbosheth confronts Abner about it, and he says, "Why did you sleep with my father's concubine?" Well, instead of Abner, and the first line here is, during the war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. So what we know is he's kind of building up his own people, his own and obviously sleeping with Saul's concubine. Maybe he was building some strength through that line by doing that, and so gaining some power on his own, which is not the first time we would ever see that. So Ishbosheth calls him out, and Abner doesn't repent. He doesn't say you were right. He kind of freaks out and he threatens him. And so what we see, he answers in verse 8, "Am I a dog's head on Judah's side? This very day, I'm loyal to the house of your father Saul and his family and friends. I haven't handed you over to David, yet now you accuse me of offense involving this woman." Boom. So he shows how angry he is. Verse 9, "May God deal with Abner himself." He's talking about himself in the third person. "Be it ever so severely, if I do not do for David what the Lord promised him on oath, and transfer the kingdom of the house of Saul and establish David's throne over Israel and Judah from Dan to Beersheba." And then that shuts Ishbosheth up. So he says, "May God deal with me." So may deal with me severely if I don't transfer the kingdom over. So now Abner is going to be treacherous, and he's going to turn from Ishbosheth, and he's going to hand the kingdom over to David. What bothers me is that his line that kind of, I feel like it's, I don't know, glossed over maybe a little bit. If I don't do for David what the Lord promised him, an oath. So he never should have, if this is true, and it is, God does promise David the kingdom, he should have never put Ishbosheth in position in the first place. Like, what he did the first time was wrong. He should have immediately recognized that David was king and gone under David, because what he does recognize is that the Lord promised him this on an oath. He promised the kingdom to David, the house of Saul to David, to establish David's throne over Israel and Judah. And so he's doing it out of jealousy and anger and maybe cunning, right? So he's doing it for in some ways, I'm going to say, the wrong reasons. Now, I'm not making any judgments one way or the other. I'm just stating from his perspective, from Ishbosheth's perspective, Abner is doing a bad thing. So Abner is turning on him, and from what I can see, it looks like Abner didn't follow what the Lord originally said. Now he's just doing it because Ishbosheth stepped up to him and threatened him, right? So it just feels like he's not really following the Lord. He's doing it for the wrong reasons. Anyway, I'm saying this because I get a little caught up in emotions, because David, as we see what David does, if we move on, it says Abner sent messengers on his behalf to David. He says, "Make an agreement with me, and I will help bring all Israel over to you." And so he wants to deal with David now because he's mad at Ishbosheth, and he wants to deal with David. And he's built up a lot of power. People are now responding to him. Again, he's first in command. So they follow him. They listen to him. They honor him. And so he's trying to make a deal with David. And then David follows up and he says he'll make an agreement with him, but he wants his original wife back. He wants Saul's daughter, Michal, back. And so give me a second. Abner agrees to give the wife back. So he agrees to go give the wife back. And then it says, then after that, so he says, "Don't come into my presence unless you bring her back." But then in verse 14, David then sends messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and says, "I want my wife back." And then so in verse 15, Ishbosheth gives orders to have her taken from her husband. So this is like so sad. So first she's taken from David, right? She already has a kid with David. So she's taken from David and she's given to this new guy, right? And she's with this new guy for several years, living with this new guy. And then now they're taking her from him and they're giving her back to David. And I just want to note, right? I'm not saying one is right or wrong. I'm having a hard time saying one is right or wrong. She was originally married to David, but she was taken and was remarried to. Now, I don't know what she wanted. We don't really get to know what her choice was. It says this husband is weeping after her. So he loved her and he wanted to be with her, but we don't necessarily know at this point what her choice was. We do, if you guys remember back a few chapters ago, she did love David. And so that's why Saul originally gave her to David, because he thought he could have a hold over David because of her. So he was being vindictive or conniving in giving her away as a wife, but she did love David. And if you remember also, she protected David and she sent him away and set up that totem in his bed, if you remember. So when they came in, they thought David was sleeping. So she did protect him. So she loved him. So I don't really know what she desired and what she wanted. And so it's a little hard for me watching her get torn back and forth. But that's just an emotional piece in my brain. It doesn't even say what God wanted. It just says that David took her back. Now, what we can say, and it's funny because I learned this from my cousin and something that he saw in the reading, is that he brilliantly, David, cemented not just his starting to be king because they all turned to him, right? So they all followed him and flocked to him. And obviously the Lord anointed him. But logistically, on paper, he was technically Saul's son-in-law because he was married to Saul's daughter. So there was also something very logical that when people would look and see that he was ruling the kingdom, he had Saul's daughter as his wife. And so that would cement him even further in being Saul's second in command, because he's Saul's son-in-law. So it would cement him as coming in as the king. So, but anyway, my heart breaks a little bit for her because I feel like she doesn't get a choice in the matter. So anyway, moving on. But she doesn't. And so that unfortunately was the way that was. So when we go to verse 17, Abner confers with the elders of Israel and he tries to convince them. So now he's Team David. And so he tries to convince the elders, not tries, but convinces the elders. So the elders of all of the 11 nations of Israel, right? So the ones, everyone but Judah. And so he reaches out to them and he says, you guys wanted to make him king. Now's the time. And so forget Ishbosheth and let's make this guy king. And so he says, come over and do that. And then he reaches out to Benjamin, seems like separately. And I'm going to say it's because Ishbosheth is from the tribe of Benjamin, because Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. So maybe they needed a little special TLC to come over and to recognize David as the king. So he goes over, and then in verse 20, when he had 20 men with him, came to David at Hebron. David prepared a feast for him because this is what David does. Abner says, let me go at once and assemble all of Israel for the Lord my king, so they may make a covenant with you and that you may rule over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away and he sent him in peace. And at this point, David is at peace with Abner. Abner has made a deal with him. Abner has followed through on that deal with him. He has done all that he said he was going to do. And, David recognized him obviously as a second in command as Saul. So he doesn't necessarily know about what I would say was the treachery in his heart because of what he was doing. But he does recognize that the two of them made a deal. And so there's peace. So it says he went in peace. So there's peace between the two of them. So, but then danger comes. Verse 22, just then David's men and Joab returned from a raid and brought with them a great deal of plunder. Abner wasn't there anymore, but Joab learns that he makes a deal with Abner. So you remember the story a few chapters back. Joab's brother was the one that was chasing Abner. Remember, so going back just a little bit, there was 12 and 12 from each of the tribes, one in the kingdom of Saul, one tribe in the kingdom of David. And there were 12 men. They kind of went after each other. They attacked each other. They all died. And then after that, there was a war between those people. Saul's team was losing and Abner was leaving. And this Asahel followed him and kind of went after him. And Joab told him to stop. And he said, I don't want to kill you. He wouldn't stop. And so Joab wound up killing him. Well, now we see the fruit of that is Joab is pretty infuriated that David has made a deal with Abner. So then Joab leaves David, sends messengers after Abner, and brings him back. So Abner's like on his way home, and Joab sends a message and says, hey, come back. There's a little more talking that David has to do. And so Abner does come back. And then once he's there, it says he's there to avenge the blood of his brother Asahel, and Joab stabs him in the stomach and he dies. David finds out. He's brokenhearted. I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord. So he's showing through his vow with the Lord that David had nothing to do with this. And on top of that, he cursed Joab and his family. And another thing that I struggle with a little bit, because I think to myself, it seems, I mean, I don't know. We hear this expression, all's fair in love and war. That's actually going through my head while I'm sitting here thinking about this, is that all is fair in love and war. And I guess maybe in some ways, I don't even want to say that's true. I mean, I feel like Joab didn't consult with the Lord. He didn't consult with prophets. He didn't consult with the ephod. The Urim and Thummim. He avenged his brother. And so he, once again, just using emotions that I think that we would all understand, he goes after Abner and he kills him. And so I mourn a little bit with Joab because I understand why he did what he did, but he wasn't given permission to do so through anyone, through the Lord or through his king. And so he didn't have permission for anyone. And again, he did it on the sneak, right? So we saw that he sneakily did it. And this wasn't for God. So in no way, shape, or form do we see that he was doing this to avenge the Lord for some reason, but it was just to avenge his brother. And so as painful as I feel like it is, maybe it was something that needed approval. It needed to be asked for. So anyway, I'm not 100% sure, of course, of what that might be. I can kind of venture a guess, but what we do see is that David is not having any of it, and he actually curses them with leprosy and skin disease through all the generations. So he says, may his blood fall on the head of Joab and his whole family. May Joab's family never be without someone who has a running sore or leprosy, or who leans on a crutch, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks food. So it's famine, death, leprosy, which again, I know I've made it somewhat clear, but leprosy means that you are completely ostracized from the rest of the kingdom. You are either living in a cave or you're living on the side of the road begging for food, but no one comes near you because you have to continue to shout, unclean, unclean. So in some ways, I feel like it's even worse than death is to have leprosy in that time. And so this is a curse on him and his whole family. And then obviously it just follows up. It says Joab and his brother Abishai murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in the battle at Gibeon. So it's just a reminder of what happened in the past. So then moving on to 31, it says, David said to Joab and all the people with him, tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and walk in mourning in front of Abner. So once again, we see David stepping up to do the honorable thing. David, things happened in the past. David honors Abner in his position as who he was. And even in that, and again, I want to be careful with saying like all these things need to go through the generations. I'm not going to say any of that, or that any of this is God's law or any of those things, but just watching him be honorable in people in command, either around his station or over his station, or some kind of honor and respect that he gives to the positions and to the people, and in ways that we wouldn't do. Like obviously Joab chases after him and he kills him because he's avenging his brother. But David shows him honor as a leader of the people, or as someone who brought the kingdom into him, whatever that might be. So David did honor him. And just thinking about that in my daily life, right? Like who I do and don't honor. And who I even maybe pulling out honor, because I don't feel like we don't use that word really anymore, but who do I respect and who do I show respect to in a daily basis, and why? All right. And then David, it says at verse 33, the king sang lament over Abner. So he's singing over him. He's lamenting for him. They're mourning him. He's having the whole nation mourn him. And then in verse 36, it says, all the people took note and were pleased. Indeed, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the people there and all Israel knew that the king had no part in the murder of Abner. So they recognized through his deeds that he didn't do any of the things that Joab did. He wasn't a part of it. Then the king says to his men, do you not realize that a commander and a great man has fallen? So again, we're honoring him for his deeds. And today, though I am the anointed king, I am weak. And these sons of Zeruiah are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds. And I just love this expression. I am weak and they are too strong for me. Is that a reality? Probably not. He's the king. And he's David, right? He went out and he killed, according to the legend, he killed 200 Philistines and he brought their foreskins back. Like, I don't think that there's a major issue with his strength. So I think it is much more about allowing God to do what God does, right? So remember, he cursed the sons. And then he's saying, like, they stepped out and they did things that they weren't necessarily supposed to do. And so David is showing that he's not going to do that. He's weak. And he's going to let God do the things that God does. God is the one who is the strongest and in control of all of those things. And David is just a man and he's weak. So he's letting the Lord repay that. In other words, also, he's not going to repay for the evil deeds, right? So he cursed him, but he's not going to repay him. He's not going to kill them, right? He's not going to put that family to death. So, all right. Moving on this, it says, when Ishbosheth, son of Saul, heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost courage, and all Israel became alarmed. Now, Saul's son had two men who were leaders of raiding bands. So this was Benah and Rechab. And these two were, they were not his sons. They were sons of one of the leaders. And so these two sons went after Ishbosheth. So they came in. So if we go to 2 Samuel 4, it says, Rechab and Benah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, set out for the house of Ishbosheth. They arrived and they stabbed him in the stomach, waited for him to die. They cut off his head. They brought his head back to David. They were super proud of themselves. And they were like, hey, look what we got. We've got his head. And David, of course, lost it once again. So knowing how much David, and maybe they just aren't around him enough, or maybe I don't know. But knowing how much David honors, he honored Saul, who was after him all the time. He honored Abner, who was after him all the time. And then they're going to go and they're going to kill Ishbosheth, and they're going to come in and they're going to be proud and like dropping the head at his feet as if he was going to be excited for that. So he says, David answers and says, as surely as the Lord lives, who has delivered me out of every trouble? When someone told me Saul is dead and thought he was bringing me good news, I seized him and put him to death in Ziklag. That was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more when wicked men have killed an innocent man in his own house, on his own bed? Should I not now demand his blood from your hand? So David killed those men. And then he honored Ishbosheth. He took Ishbosheth's head and he took it and placed it in Abner's tomb. And then he cut off the hands and feet of the bodies of the two killers and he hung them in Hebron. So let this be a lesson to you people. Do not kill those that are in charge and bring me their heads and think that I'm going to be happy about that, because he was not. Not unless he tells you to go out and do it, right? He's the king. He's the one that's in charge. So ending on that note today, following David, we're going to continue to follow him tomorrow. And we're going to see what else he does. What happens? Does he become king? I think he does. So I want you guys to keep reading. And tomorrow will be April 22nd. So I want you to stay into that reading. We're going to continue in the book of Samuel. If you like this, I just want you to hit the like button. I want you to share the page and the channel with people. I want you to subscribe to the channel. So if you're listening, subscribe so it keeps coming back to you. Otherwise, it's going to be too hard to find, and you'll have to find it piecemeal. And then you're going to get out of order. You're going to run out of that chronological reading. So I want you to stay in your reading, stick with it, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.